It's not you all, it's the people
Um,
that is not going to be shown.
well,
I spotlighted it so everybody's seeing you now.
okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fogs and welcome to 2021. Happy New Year. Maybe we'll get to see each other in person this year if things go well. But right now we have a pretty full agenda for the year. We have a lot of programs scheduled. We're starting out here with Zach Distel, and Zach is in the oh gee, I've got the wrong thing open here on my computer. He is a employee of the Sons of the American Revolution facility over in Louisville. And just a second, I'll give you his exact there we go, his exact title, if I have it right. The Curator and Program Exhibit Director at Sons of the American Revolution facility in Louisville. And he's going to talk tonight about the Burr conspiracy, especially concerning the Burr conspiracy here in this area. Next month, I believe on February 4th, we have a gentleman talking about Davis Floyd and his life. After that, I believe we have the Army Corps of Engineers talking about their history here. And then you're stuck with me for 2 months. So I'm going to be talking about Floyd's brother-in-law, General Washington Johnston, and also about 2 new tours online that the Indiana Room at Jefferson Township Public Library has come up with lately, and those are going to be online soon. So with no further ado, unless anybody has something else, I think we'll hand it over to Zach.
I was going to, before you do turn it over, I was going to have you
something?
put in a plug for your program that you're doing later this month at the library.
You might have yourself muted, Allison.
Can anybody else hear me?
Yes, I could.
Okay, sorry, I could not.
Oh, I just was gonna say if you could mention the program that you're doing at the library on the 23rd.
Oh yeah, on the 23rd at 6 p.m. Through Jeffersonville Township Public Library with help from the Indiana Humanities. We are going to be holding an author talk with Professor or Dr. James Madison about his new book, The Klan in the Heartland, which is a history of the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana. And you may be aware, but one of the most scandalous chapters in the Klan's history was not in the Deep South, but in Indiana in the 1920s. He is looking at a broad overview of Klan activity in Indiana in this book, and I think it's going to be a really good program. He is a very eminent authority in Indiana history, so we're excited to have got funding from the Indiana Humanities organization to bring him to you. And if you want to listen to that, just go to jefflibrary.org and events, and you will get instructions for registering for the program. So anything else? Your cat said something. Someone's cat said something.
She meows for nothing. She won't let me touch her, but she does meow.
Okay, well, Zach, are you ready to take over?
Yeah, I will try to, let's see here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you for having me. I wish we could do this in person, maybe someday in the future. But as Diane said, my name is Zach Distel, and I am the Curator and Program Exhibit Director at the Sons of the American Revolution, headquartered here in Louisville. And I'm going to do a brief presentation about Aaron Burr and the First Indiana Canal Company. So before we get started, sorry. Okay. So the National Society of the Sons of the American Revolution is a nonpartisan male lineage society. So each of our more than 36,000 members have done their genealogy and proven their descent from a participant of the American Revolution, which means someone who you could have signed a document, somebody who was in the military, somebody who provided aid to the military. There's quite a few different ways to get in, but that is how every member has proven that. And the mission of the SAR is patriotic, historical, and educational. It's founded in 1889 and congressionally chartered in 1906. And that is our headquarters right on Louisville, or on Main Street in Louisville. And I always tell everyone we're right across the street from the Big Bat, because everyone knows where that is. Also at this location is the National SAR Genealogical Research Library. It is open to the public, although it is not open to the public right now because of the pandemic. But we're hoping by summer, early fall to be back open again. But we have more than 50,000 volumes here pertaining to all 50 states and some foreign countries. We are a family search affiliate library, so we have access to extra data sets and other records that you are not able to access online. So if you come to our building, you can actually access some of those that are out in Utah from our building. And we are always looking for volunteers if you're interested to either work in the library itself and help members of the public do genealogy, or we also have a digitization lab where we're digitizing records, and you can learn how to use some of that digitization equipment. And of course, if you volunteer, you are more than welcome to also do your own research in the library.
Zach, I want to make sure, are we supposed to be seeing slides right now or no?
Yes, did I not?
I'm going to take the spotlight off in case that made any difference.
There we go.
Now we're seeing a screen, so.
Okay. Okay, are you seeing a full screen PowerPoint?
Yep, now we are.
I'm sorry.
No,
You've
that's
probably
okay.
just been looking at me looking all over the place. Okay, so I'll flip back. There's our building on Main Street, and here's the title slide. So go back, and so that's a picture of our library and our digitization lab. So if anybody has any questions about the library or how to access it or any of the records here, feel free to contact me and I can put you in touch with our librarian. Okay, so before we dive in, I thought it would be good to do a quick overview of who Aaron Burr is and who the person is that made his way to the Falls of the Ohio. To do those, I thought it might be fun to do some true and false questions. So the first one, true or false, Aaron Burr impressed Benedict Arnold. I'll give you a second to think. So that is actually true. Aaron Burr joined the Continental Army very early in the Revolutionary War in 1775, and he participated in the Northern Campaign that went into Canada. And Benedict Arnold actually was very impressed with his vigor and his enterprising nature. And he actually met James Wilkinson, who will play a big part in the Burr conspiracy during that campaign. Okay, so true or false, Aaron Burr stopped a mutiny during the American Revolution? That one is also true. By the winter at Valley Forge, Burr had proved himself, and he was an officer by then. And he was actually placed at an unruly outpost where some soldiers were protecting the very fringes of the camp. And he was sent out there to impose rule, and he learned of a plot against him. So he unloaded their muskets and allowed them to line up. And a soldier actually stepped out, pointed his musket at Burr and pulled the trigger, but he knew it was empty. So he allowed it to, click. And he then nearly took the soldier's arm off with his saber and accused him of treason. Okay, so true or false, George Washington recommended Aaron Burr to President Adams for military service. That is very false. Aaron Burr briefly served as one of Washington's aides during the Revolution, but he quickly found it boring, and him and Washington never really got along. And this is actually one of the earliest points of the Burr-Hamilton their contentious relationship, I guess you could say. But Washington wrote to Adams, Colonel Burr is a brave and able officer, but the question is whether he has not equal talents at intrigue. So early on, Washington recognized that Burr was a very ambitious person. Okay, so true or false, Aaron Burr revolutionized American political campaigns. That, for better or worse, is true. In the presidential election of 1800, Burr actually ran what is arguably the first modern political campaign, where he organized door-to-door campaigns. He met directly with supporters, and he didn't pretend to be a quote above the fray. His opponent in that race was Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson very much remained erudite, and what he considered, Jefferson was too good to engage in debates or to really meet with people, and he relied on his supporters to go out and rally support for him, whereas Burr laid out districts. He figured out where he needed to go to get votes, and really set up how we still run campaigns today. Okay, so true or false? The July 11, 1804 duel at Weehawken was the second time Burr and Hamilton had faced each other in a duel. That is false, but it is not the first time they had both been involved in a duel. In 1797, after the Reynolds affair, James Monroe accused Alexander Hamilton of inappropriately using government funds. And if you're not familiar with the Reynolds affair, Hamilton was having a literal affair with a woman whose last name was Reynolds, and he was paying her hush money to keep it secret, and that became public, and Monroe claimed that he was using government funds to pay her off. So Hamilton took great offense at that and admitted publicly, yes, I was having an affair, but I would never use public funds to pay the hush money. And Burr stepped in and stopped them from dueling, actually. Which leads us into the beginning of the Burr conspiracy. So it is 1805. Sorry, actually more like late 1804. You're Aaron Burr, your vice presidency is over. You've just engaged in this duel. You're potentially facing murder charges. So it's probably best to go somewhere where it's less populated and get away from New York and Washington. So he starts looking west. And the years from 1750 to 1800 brought a lot of change. Not only was the United States founded, a new government was founded, but really the way that people lived in North America changed a lot too. In 1750, almost everybody lived within 100 miles of the East Coast. By 1800, you have states, forming what today we would call the Midwest. And you have the Ohio and the Indiana Territory. And you can see on this map, see if I can bring my mouse over. The map company included these mountains here, the Appalachian Mountains. Those were very important in that period. They not only physically basically cut the country in two, but they also cut the economy in two. So people living on the East Coast look to the Atlantic Ocean for their, they traded with Europe and other colonies, and that is where their economy was focused. But people living in the Ohio River Valley, Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana territories, they're looking down the Ohio River and down the Mississippi River to go out through New Orleans into the Gulf and then bring products up to either Europe or those East Coast colonies. So the rivers are how farmers in the Ohio River Valley would get their products and make their living. And I think it's interesting that from basically the first days of the country, the quote urban-rural divide was baked in right away. That's not a new thing that we've been dealing with, but even here you can see, the urban and rural communities, they were very connected and they were interdependent regions. So this section here of the Mississippi River up until 1795 was actually controlled by Spain. So if you lived in the Ohio River Valley, you had to take your products over the Appalachian Mountains to get them to Baltimore, New York, Philadelphia. 1795, we have the Pinckney Treaty with Spain, which actually opens that section of the river for travel to Americans. You still needed a license to get out through New Orleans, but with the river opening there, that almost overnight dramatically increases the value of land along the Ohio River in the Ohio River Valley and in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky. So you could say it's not quite a direct comparison, but that was really the Silicon Valley of that era. It attracted a lot of speculators, and that was where the future was going to be. And Aaron Burr saw that, so that's why he headed west. So that section of the Mississippi River was opened in 1795. And then 1803, you have the Louisiana Purchase. So that not only doubled the size of the country, but that also ostensibly secured the Mississippi River and New Orleans for the United States. So especially after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and by 1804, that land in Ohio and Kentucky and Indiana is very valuable now. And that is where the speculators are really looking. And this is the environment into which Aaron Burr is going to inject himself. So he started planning his trip in late 1804 and early 1805. And at this point, Lewis and Clark are on their expedition. The Mississippi River had been opened. The future just looked very bright at that point. So with the Mississippi River secured, I don't think I need to explain to anyone in this group the significance of the Falls of the Ohio. But so with the Louisiana Purchase and the Mississippi River open, these are the next biggest impediment to the Western economy. And it's hard to overstate the impact of what a canal around the Falls of the Ohio would do for the Western economy. If you could travel from Pittsburgh to New Orleans on one boat and not have to stop, that is going to generate a lot of revenue. So Aaron Burr decides that part of his future is going to be seeing a canal built around the falls. And before we get into the conspiracy, I think it's important to remember in this period, whenever I study this period or I really think about the American Revolution, I just kind of stop sometimes and think like, how did they come up with these schemes? How did they think that they would be able to accomplish that? They just took on monumental tasks. And part of that this was the era of quote unquote great men. So all of the founding fathers, people in the revolutionary generation, and also including their British counterparts, they're all reading the classics. So they're reading Caesar's conquest of Gaul and Thucydides' history of the invasion of Hannibal into Italy. And even George Rogers Clark was called the Hannibal of the West. And if you read newspaper accounts of this period, they even use the term great man. You can find accounts of people saying, so-and-so had Aaron Burr over for dinner and he agrees that he is a great man. So it's an era where, you know, especially European men believed that the only thing holding them down was the limits of their ambition. So go big, go after very ambitious projects. Which brings us to the beginning of what will today be remembered as the Burr conspiracy. So this is a very large, convoluted couple of years, and it would be very difficult to cover all of it in one presentation. So I'm going to really try to give you the bare bones so you can understand kind of the situation that was going on and why the falls of the Ohio. So Burr set out from Pittsburgh in mid 1805 on a boat very similar to the one pictured here, probably also drinking and music and having fun and floating down the river. And he's going out on what he's calling a westward adventure to explore the West. And even today, we're not exactly sure what his objectives were. We are sure that he had multiple objectives. First and foremost, and it was a legitimate objective, and this is what he publicly announced was the reason for his trip, was to investigate the Indiana Canal Company and the potential of building a canal on the Indiana side of the Falls of the Ohio. But some of his other potential objectives, and these are kind of gleaned from studying, you know, where he went, who he talked to. Aaron Burr was a very adept lawyer, so he was very good at hiding his true intentions of what his travels were. But so he was investigating the canal company. He was looking into possibly starting a life anew in the West as a Western congressman or a politician. There's all these states being formed, so they're going to need governors and representatives. He was potentially going to settle on the legally shaky Bastrop land grant, which was a contested territory in Northeast Louisiana. He was potentially positioning himself to be a military leader in, at that time, what was anticipated to be the imminent outbreak of a Spanish-American War. And even more speculatively, but again, this is an era of great men, some people think he may have even been going out to set up his own country out of parts of some of these Western and Southern territories and parts of Mexico and install himself as a monarch for life. But keep in mind that, you know, he had roughly these, potentially all 5 of those objectives. We don't know. He may have had 2 or 3 of those objectives, but all of them kind of feed into one another. And those really dictate his trip and where he goes. So we know in 1805, as he travels down the river, he comes to Louisville. And the environment that he comes into when he visits, we know that he went and saw the area that he wanted to build the canal on the Indiana side. The year before, Kentucky had established the Ohio Company to build a canal on the Kentucky side. That did not start off very well. There was actually a lot of contention on the Kentucky side. And in fact, people living in Louisville and in Portland didn't want it to be built because they had established a lucrative portage trade, having the boats stop there. So they didn't want it. So the Kentucky side was pretty divided and they didn't really seem like they had a good plan in place. Before he had traveled out, Burr had actually worked with people in Washington to investigate a canal and to try to get a congressional charter to see if he could get federal money to help build it. Well, that all fell through, so he worked with some of the same people and he got the Indiana Territory to charter the Indiana Canal Company in 1805. And as we said, this is an era of great men, and he is working in the equivalent of Silicon Valley. So his project attracted opportunists. One of them was James Wilkinson, who we said he met on that invasion of Canada. And at this point, James Wilkinson was a suspicious character, to say the least. If you're ever reading any history from the Revolutionary War, up to like the War of 1812, and James Wilkinson's name pops up, you can be certain that something unethical, if not probably illegal, is happening. He is considered one of the greatest rascals in American history. Almost certainly probably guilty of treason, definitely was selling secrets to foreign nations, anything he could do to make a buck. So he, as you can see, not listed as a board of directors or on the board of directors, but he helped Burr plan his trip out west. Wilkinson had been working in the West. By this point, he is an administrator in the newly formed Louisiana Territory. So the entire area that was the Louisiana Purchase. So Wilkinson knew all the right people, and he was telling Burr where to go, who to talk to. And unfortunately, because Burr and Wilkinson were involved from the beginning, the Indiana Canal Company was probably doomed from the beginning. But so you have this board of directors, and you can see you have 11 men there. About half of them were local. Aaron Burr, national figure. You have John Brown was a senator from Kentucky. Jonathan Dayton was another senator from the Northeast. Benjamin Hovey was actually a general in the Army, and he was still working in DC. So he tried to create a mix of national and local figures. And so we're going to look at just a few of the people on the board of directors from the area. So George Rogers Clark was a pretty clear pick to be on the board of directors and to work with Burr. By 1805, Clark is in financial dire straits, and it's possible and perhaps probable that when Burr visited the area in 1805, he may have privately met with Clark to discuss the canal and potentially one, two, or all four of those other objectives, ranging from becoming a congressman up to invading Mexico. Clark would have been a natural pick for Burr. So one thing that connects everybody that Burr met with on his Western journeys is that he was trying to solicit money, political influence, or potential military involvement. And Clark actually ticks two of those boxes. He doesn't have a lot of money at this point, but he does have an unquestionable resume. He had led the army up to, or had led his men up to Vincennes. He showed that he was not afraid of an enterprising venture. And actually in 1794, Clark was commissioned by the French government to lead a privately raised army down the Mississippi River to push the Spanish out. That was the year before the Pinckney Treaty between the United States and Spain. But Clark actually spent a lot of his own money arming a private army, and that only stopped when George Washington found out about it and said, absolutely not. And Clark lost a lot of money, but he also showed to Burr that he wasn't afraid to potentially lead an army into Mexico. So we actually don't know what he told Clark or what Clark promised him he would do, but it's clear that Clark ticked a lot of boxes for Burr. Okay, so I know next month you all are having a presentation on Davis Floyd, so I'm going to stick to the Indiana Canal Company and the Burr conspiracy as much as possible here. Don't want to step on the other presenters' toes, but so Davis Floyd is, again, keep in mind all of these different potential agendas that Burr had, in that he was trying to solicit something from everybody that he got involved with. So Davis Floyd was a Kentucky militia officer. He was a river pilot. He actually helped run a ferry at the bottom of the Falls of the Ohio. So he had knowledge of the area. He knew about river traffic and could probably advise on the canal itself. And he was also a frontiersman. He'd been raised on the frontier. So all of these combinations, whether he's going to help build a canal, or Burr has these other objectives. Floyd is a valuable person, and because of all of these skills that he has, he slowly makes his way into the inner circle of the Burr conspiracy. And so, again, we're still not entirely sure what Burr was trying to accomplish, but Davis Floyd ends up actually raising troops locally and will lead men in 1806 down the Ohio to the Mississippi, and is taking essentially what would have been a regiment down to Natchez, where that's actually when the conspiracy was broken up, and Davis Floyd escapes. He makes his way back to Indiana, and he is there arrested. And we'll talk more about, or I'll tell you more about the Burr conspiracy in a few slides, but Floyd is the only person found guilty in this national sensation. And he was found guilty of, I believe it's, don't quote me on this, but it's something to the effect of engaging in potentially treasonous acts. For that very large crime, he did 3 hours in jail and paid a $10 fine. Okay, so another board member was William Cron. We actually have records that Cron hosted Burr for dinner when he visited town, and they likely discussed the canal, and also, so that would have been at Locust Grove. George Rogers Clark's sister, Lucy, is married to William, so it's also possible that George Rogers Clark was in attendance at that dinner. That may be where Clark could have met with Burr. There's really just not a lot of records left. But once again, keep in mind all of those agendas that Burr may have had, and that he is trying to solicit political influence, money, and potential military engagement out of people. So William Cron, again, he ticks a lot of those boxes. Him and Burr were not particularly close, but they definitely ran in a lot of the same circles. They were both members of the Society of Cincinnati. They were both Revolutionary War veterans. Cron was very well respected. And so he was a natural pick for the board of directors for the Indiana Canal Company. Okay, so to talk about, Burr visited Louisville in 1805. He actually traveled from Pittsburgh to Kentucky, went through Tennessee, went all the way down to Louisiana, and then traveled overland back to Pittsburgh, and then was back in Washington, D.C., meeting with people there, soliciting more support. And then he headed out on another journey in 1806. And it appears that his 1806 journey is when he planned to act on some or one or all of his schemes. And that is when Davis Floyd went down the Mississippi with troops. Again, Aaron Burr, a very adept lawyer, very good at covering his tracks, didn't leave written records. He was probably telling all of his co-conspirators different things. So Aaron Burr is probably the only person who actually knew what was going on. But with his arrest and with the impending trial, the Indiana Canal Company actually imploded on itself. So as we talked about, there are all these individuals who are involved, and as soon as that happens, everybody wants to distance themselves. Part of the core of the prosecution in the Burr conspiracy was that he had misappropriated funds from the Indiana Canal Company and spent them on potentially treasonous acts. He actually, in actual 1805 dollars, was able to raise $120,000. And so that was a central part of the trial. And so although the Indiana Canal Company essentially just went away in early 1807, without it, the Kentucky Canal effort actually may not have happened. So when the Kentuckians saw this Indiana Canal Company pop up with the former vice president, senators on the boards of directors, George Rogers Clark, William Cron, the Kentuckians realized that they needed to get their act together, or they're going to lose the canal, and all that revenue and fees from the canal are going to go to the Indiana side. And so with all that, the conspiracy is over. Burr is actually found not guilty and was helped out by his defense attorney, a very young Henry Clay. And Burr kind of fades into an obscurity after that. He goes to Europe, where he licks his wounds and eventually comes back to the United States and dies alone in a public house. But it has to be asked, though, so was Burr making an authentic effort when he founded the Indiana Canal Company? And I say ask New York City because before he was vice president in 1799 in New York City, Burr had introduced, quote, an act for supplying the city of New York with pure and wholesome water, end quote. And he actually got that passed, and he got it chartered by the state of New York. And part of that charter is that it gave special financial abilities and tax status. And so Burr exploited all of those loopholes and turned that, what was supposed to be waterworks, into a bank that actually still exists today. And you've probably heard of them. That's the Chase Manhattan Bank. It was actually started by a ruse of Aaron Burr that was very successful. So that begs the question, if the Indiana Canal Company had just been left to its devices and Aaron Burr was able to succeed, would a canal actually have been built? And the answer is probably yes. He probably was actually trying to get that canal built. He actually sent correspondence back east saying, send workers, send supplies. But it's doubtful if the building of a canal was central to his motivation. It was probably a way for him to, again, achieve one or all of those goals. If he could get this canal built, that's a great way to ingratiate himself and the people in the West and become a congressman. It's also a way to help out all of his friends who are speculating in land in the Ohio River Valley. It's a way to open up river traffic. So if he ends up buying land, he can then sell his products down the river. We really just don't know, and that is by design. Aaron Burr wanted it that way. But in the end, the canal fell through. Sorry. And I just have to say, as an individual, I am happy that Aaron Burr failed because I personally really enjoy biking on the Greenway from Jeffersonville to New Albany, which wouldn't be happening today had Burr succeeded. So that's a really quick overview of the Indiana Canal Company and the Burr conspiracy. Can I answer any questions?
I muted people while he was presenting, so if you have a question, please, you'll probably need to unmute yourself, just FYI.
I noticed that several of the guys on your list of board of directors were probably related, at least by marriage, being the genealogy librarian. I wondered if Burr was related to any of them in any way besides just having bumped into them or noting that they were men of some power. Obviously, a lot of them were for the Virginia plant, the Tidewater planting culture. So they already had money and power when they were born. So that probably had something to do with it. But
yeah, everybody came from pretty elite backgrounds, and a lot of them did come from, the East Virginia. A lot of those people had either moved to the area themselves or were first generation people in that area. William Cron, I believe, is the only person that he had any kind of distant relation. You would have to ask Carol Ely at Locust Grove about that. She's looked into it deeply. I think it's something like Burr's third cousin was married to one of Cron's uncles. So they were not directly related, but there was a very distant family relation.
That was Carol Healy at Locust
Ely,
Grove?
E-L-Y. She's the executive director at Locust Grove. So I know she knows a lot about George Rogers Clark's and William Cron's involvement.
Very good, thank you.
There's an interesting non-blood connection. Burr killed Hamilton. Davis Floyd was associated with Burr and later on was associated with Alexander Hamilton Jr. in Florida. And they didn't get along. Now, I don't know what there's any.
I didn't know that.
What wasn't Burr's son also involved in that relationship?
I don't know.
Whatever business relationship they had? Or was that was here, wasn't it? I know I've read about something like that.
Yeah, I believe Burr only had a daughter, and she was actually lost at sea, I believe, in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nephew something. I'll have to look it up, but it's probably past your period. So.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounds reasonable. You know, all. It's hard to think today, but really, I mean, from like 1795 to 1810, you know, all eyes were on the Ohio River Valley. That was really, you know, that is, Washington spent most of his life thinking about Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana because he knew that's where the future was.
The canal may not have succeeded on the Indiana side because supposedly they ran into a lot more rock than they thought was there. And so it's hard to say exactly what were the all the causes of its failing.
Yeah, I forgot to add, you know, George Rogers Clark and his involvement on the board of directors, he actually did go out and survey what was going to be the route of the canal. And part of the plan for the canal company is that they believed they could redirect a stream into a naturally formed gully. So part of their sales pitch was that, yes, the Indiana side will have to be longer than the Louisville side, but we can do it more efficiently and for less money and use the natural landscape.
That was probably Mill Creek.
I think you're right. But yeah, they were going to redirect that and essentially create a small inland lake was their plan.
So what happened to the money?
That's a good question. I know some of it did get spent on whatever Burr was trying to do. We still don't know. I believe a large portion of it was actually invested into gunboats. Burr met with shipbuilders along the Ohio River and along the Mississippi River as part of his journey. And that's part of why I said, like, it is so difficult to cover it because he was just so busy. And it was like one day he's meeting with a banker, the next day he's meeting with shipbuilders, the next day he's meeting with frontiersmen. So I know some of it got spent on property that was then confiscated because once the company fell in on itself, I believe all of it should have reverted back to the Indiana territory. But some of it had been spent and just disappeared.
Look at that. I remember reading in a biography of William Henry Harrison something about the number of men who are known to have joined his cause from this area. Several of them were discovered, I guess, from this area, but they were all small time and nobody went after them.
Yeah, that's why I think it's peculiar that Davis Floyd is the only person who got prosecuted out of the Burr conspiracy. And it's probably just because he didn't have great representation. Aaron Burr was a lawyer himself. All these other senators who were implicated, they could all afford, the best lawyers, and they were all based out of the East Coast in the cities. And here's poor Davis Floyd out on the frontier, who knows what Burr told him. We don't know what he thought he was doing. But potentially, wrong place, wrong time. Be careful who your friends are.
Poor Floyd.
This isn't something that I had really had any prior knowledge of at all. So what did Davis Floyd use as an excuse for why he had that whole militia with him and stuff like that? What did he try to say he was doing?
So, in this period, it wasn't quite the idea of raising an army and invading a foreign country is not that crazy of an idea in 1804 and 1805. That's essentially what George Rogers Clark did when he went to Vincennes, and that was widely celebrated. And, in 1805, 1806, it was also, the federal government wasn't that strong yet. There wasn't really much of an army to send after anybody doing that. So things like that just seemed more within reason than they would today. And so I've not actually read the court documents, so I don't know what his defense was, but I believe he kind of just pled ignorance. He refused to testify about anything because he was defending Burr. And some of the other co-conspirators were offered clemency from the federal government if they would flip and testify against Burr. And Davis said, absolutely not, I will not testify against Colonel Burr. And he was tried, Davis was actually tried in Indiana, whereas Burr was sent back to Richmond, Virginia for trial. And I mean, in the end, it ended up really not affecting Davis too much. He did those 3 hours in jail, paid $10, and then I think it was 3 days later was elected treasurer of the Indiana Territory government. And he continued.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem to have really hampered his life. I know it was later, I think a few years later, somebody brought up the fact that he had been a part of this, and he got his militia pension cut in half for having been part of the Burr conspiracy. But that's the most biting thing that happened to him.
Yeah. And another thing, it's just, I try not to step in too much, but this has always amused me extremely much. And I knew this story long before I moved to this area, that the judge took into consideration that it would affect his wife, who threw such wonderful parties, if they overtaxed him. So that kind of tells you where things stood. He was a lot of fun, and apparently his wife's punch was a lot of fun. So
yeah, and it's important too to remember that through all of this, through the Indiana Canal Company and the whole Burr conspiracy, Davis Floyd was also an elected sheriff. So I have to imagine that had something to do with
not know that.
With not getting a strict punishment.
Okay. I did not know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, I was happy to. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, if you ever would like to come to the library just do research or anything like that, reach out to us. We hope to be reopening later this year. Or if you have any other question about the presentation, Diane has my contact information.
Well,
Thank you.
Anybody have anything else?
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, well, have a good meeting. Happy New Year. And it's been a lot of fun.
Okay. Thank
All
you very
right,
much,
thank
Zach.
you.
Goodbye.
I'm going to stop the recording.
All right.